Alright, now that we understand certain traffic manager routing methods, let's go ahead and do some labs to understand this better. We'll go ahead and understand various checkboxes and radio buttons we have in the traffic manager profiles as and when we get along those options. Alright, for demonstration purposes, I've created two web applications under app services. Call them as ecom site 1. Now the one is ecom site 2. You will notice that these web applications are hosted in two different geographical regions. Now let's see how we can connect these with the help of Traffic Manager. Now to create a Traffic Manager, in the search box, I'll type Traffic Manager Profiles and click on this purple icon that says Traffic Manager Profiles. As always, you can either click on Add button or Create Traffic Manager Profile and start filling up these values. Make sure that the name that you give to your traffic manager should always be unique and nobody else in the world must have chosen it. But just in case if you bump into any conflicts, the screen will just show the error right away. So let's give it a shot. I'm gonna give it name as traffic manager. Alright, so looks like somebody has already picked up this name, trafficmanager.trafficmanager.net. Put your mouse on the red thing and you will see that the domain name has already been picked up. So let's give it a smaller name, traf man or something. Alright, somebody's getting creative there. That web application, that endpoint has also been picked up. I'm just gonna put some numbers next to it. Alright, there you go. So this is accepted. And now these are the routing methods that we discussed so far. There's performance, weighted, priority, and geographic that we understand. But look at that, you got two others, multi-valued and subnet as well. Now let's understand these two options here. Now the multi-value traffic routing will allow you to get multiple healthy endpoints in a single query of DNS. So this will enable the caller to do certain client-side retries with other endpoints in the event of a particular endpoint being unresponsive. And that means that this kind of pattern will increase the availability of a service. And this will also reduce the latency that is usually associated with a new DNS query to obtain a healthy endpoint. Now there's another one called a subnet. This subnet traffic routing method allows you to map a set of end user IP address ranges to a specific endpoint in the profile. So if the traffic manager receives a DNS query for that profile, it will inspect the source IP address and see if that exists in that subnet. If it exists, that's when the traffic will be allowed to that particular endpoint. The subnet routing method can be used to deliver a different experience for users connecting from a specific IP address space. For example, if you got your customers making requests from a particular subnet, you can route that traffic to an endpoint. Probably maybe your corporate office is routed to one endpoint, whereas the rest of the public is routed to another endpoint. So you will have certain set of users in your office doing the testing, and hence they will be routed to a testing app, whereas other users may be routed to the production app. That's when I will use the subnet routing method. Alright, now that we understand the various routing methods here, I'm going to select weighted for example and continue through this wizard. I'll leave the subscription as pay as you go, the resource group, so we'll select my site and then click on create. It's going to take a minute to get that published on my Azure subscription. I'm going to pause the video and then connect once it is ready. So there you go. I've got my traffic manager one-to-one created and it is in weighted routing method. Let's go ahead and click on it, drill down further into the options and understand how traffic manager works. The first thing that I'm going to do is look at the DNS endpoint. So any traffic that needs to get into my endpoints has to go through this DNS name, which is http:// your traffic manager name dot trafficmanager.net. Now, when the traffic hits here, it's going to go and redirect the traffic to something called as endpoints. In the endpoints, I need to configure my endpoints that we created earlier. Remember, we created two app services. So I'm going to connect those app services to this traffic manager. I'll click on add and then let's go through these options that we have here. The endpoint that we have is of primarily two types. One is an Azure endpoint and second one is an external endpoint. So if you got your endpoints hosted in Azure in your subscription, you might want to choose Azure endpoints. Examples for this could be your load balancer or even a virtual machine. An external endpoint is a kind of endpoint which is outside your Azure subscription. This could be anything that has an FQDN. It could be application that is not hosted in Azure as well. A nested endpoint is where you would like to connect other traffic managers configured in other traffic manager routing methods. For example, this traffic manager is configured with weighted routing method. And let's say the traffic that gets into this traffic manager then gets into an endpoint, which is nested endpoint in, let's say, priority method or performance method. So you can have as many nested endpoints as possible. So in this case, we got our endpoints in Azure. So I will select Azure endpoint here. I'll give it a name, call it as endpoint 1. And then the target resource type can be a cloud service, an app service, an app service slot, or a public IP address. In our case, I've got an app service, so I'll select that. And when I click on the target resource, it should automatically pick up the endpoints that I have as far as app services are concerned. So I'm going to add them one by one in each endpoint. So selecting e-commerce 1, and then in this case, I'm going to give a routing method of 50. So once I have the weight selected, I'll just click on OK for this to set an endpoint for me. And once that is done, I'll go ahead and add a secondary endpoint. There you go. So I've got the one endpoint here. I'll click on add and then quickly add the second endpoint, calling it as endpoint 2. Yes, it's a cloud service. Okay, it's an app service. So I'll select e-commerce site 2, and then the remainder of my 50% of the traffic will go to this secondary endpoint, which is ecom site 2. I'll click on OK, and now I've got both of these endpoints connected to my traffic manager. So what does that mean? It means that any traffic that hits and gets into http:// it will be redirected to the endpoints that I've configured out here. The traffic will be load balanced between them on 50-50 basis. You can also go ahead and look at the configuration here and then change the routing method from weighted to performance, let's say, or priority. But there are other important options, for example, the DNS time to live. Time to live is the amount of time the DNS client query will be cached in your client machines. So it looks like 60 seconds is the default amount of time the client query will be cached on their machines. The traffic manager also has certain health information just like load balancer. If you recall your load balancer session, we were looking at the health probes. When should the load balancer send the traffic to the endpoint? Similarly, for traffic manager as well, the traffic manager will send the traffic to the endpoint only if they are healthy. So here are the certain health rules that you're configuring to make sure that the traffic manager sends the traffic to healthy endpoints only and the unhealthy endpoints are totally ignored. You can take a look at the traffic view, and this is a new configuration here, and you need to enable this traffic view. And this will make sure that any traffic that is going between your traffic manager and the endpoints is something that you can see. You can see where the traffic is originated from, how much latency do the users have. So by looking at these values, you will be able to fine tune your application and then also understand the user experience. The whole traffic manager section may appear like a load balancer, but keep in mind that traffic manager and load balancer, although are distributing the traffics between the endpoints, they are totally different and they are operating at two different layers of the OSI. We will understand the difference between traffic manager and load balancer in the next lesson. But for now, the takeaways from this lesson is that we understood to configure the traffic manager, connect the endpoints to it, and then also the configuration section where you can write down the health probes that the traffic manager can send to the respective endpoints that you've configured right here.